This Choircast podcast is brought to you by Heretic 2 by Matthew J. DiStefano. Ready to challenge everything you thought you knew about faith? In Heretic 2, I dive into LGBTQ affirmation, rejecting divine violence, and embracing universalism in a bold post-Christian perspective. If you're done with outdated dogma and want a justice-oriented, inclusive view of spirituality, then this book is for you. Get Heretic 2 wherever books are sold and start rethinking faith today.
It's time for another round of Snarky Faith, that space where we irreverently wrestle with the orgy of faith, politics, and culture. If you've had enough of the insanity in Christianity, well, you've come to the right place. I'm your host, Stuart Deloney, and if your conversations about faith need copious amounts of
sarcasm
and also a bit of this, then welcome home. Now let's stoke the fires of snark and venture down the slippery slope of things we don't talk about in church. So let's get to it, shall we?
Previously on Snarky Faith.
And also, I have dealt with shapeshifters. I had a werewolf who is a shapeshifting person. This is real, guys. This isn't just the movies. Snap out of it. This is real. Okay, and this werewolf was on assignment to take out a bride of Christ that had been rescued, a bride of Satan, that they were grooming her to be the bride of Satan, that had been rescued from the cult. And so the werewolf came as a punisher because a werewolf is an assassin. And I got in the way, and so I was also targeted by that same werewolf. So I've seen shapeshifters, I've seen hybrids with my own eyes. I've dealt with them, I've encountered them. I'm sound of mind. And this is real.
Well, that may not be real, but you know what is real? Trump is officially back in office. Yeah, it sucks. I know you're feeling it too. I've been quiet on here for a bit, just trying to figure out the best way forward for me mentally and otherwise, and I'll say, I feel like I've come to a place. I call it refined bitterness. Wise enough not to fall for the inflammatory rhetoric, but also focused on the shifting landscape. Trump embodies the very worst of us, and his victory was given to him by a majority of evangelical voters who have long traded their faith for power. And now where we're at? Well, the masks are off. Racism, misogyny, and cruelty are back on the menu, emboldened and unchecked. And I wish I had better news, but it is going to get dark. It is going to get dark, but you don't have to give in to despair. This isn't a time for resignation. It's a time for determination. You're not alone, and this resistance isn't about red or blue. It's about humanity. Make no mistakes, there are hard times ahead. The America we thought we knew is slipping away, but we are not powerless. That anger and that disappointment that's burning inside of you, well, we need to channel it. You need to let it fuel you. Get active. Show up for each other. Step up for those who'll be most affected by the backlash that's already starting. Our LGBTQ friends, immigrants, people of color, the working poor, and women. Protecting each other isn't just a nice idea now, it is survival. And I know, I feel this too. It's okay to still be exhausted. It's okay to be in that space. But we don't have the luxury of staying there. This is resistance. It's standing up and pushing back and refusing to let hate define us. There's a truth that we all need to hear. We've confronted darker days before, and we'll get through this. But it won't be quick, and it won't be easy. The civil rights movement, women's suffrage, workers' rights, none of this came without pain or perseverance. We can't escape the past. So either we do something about it now or live with it forever. The time to act is now. Because forever is a long damn time. And I don't want to live like this. So let's look at what we're up against. I read a new essay at the LA Progressive by Henry Giroux. I'm hoping that's right. Henry Giroux. And what he's noting right now, which I feel like may be able to help us at least make some sort of sense out of what is happening. Okay. So Henry Giroux writes this: what we are witnessing today is the rise of a re-engineered totalitarian subject, forged in the wreckage of institutions that once upheld the common good, basic rights, and civil liberties. It's been replaced by machinery designed to sustain authoritarian rule. He continues, this subject is governed by fear, surrendering their agency to the grip of cult-like devotion, and the iron hand of strongman figures. It is a subject ensnared in a culture of ignorance, enveloped by a fog of anti-intellectualism, and animated by disdain for difference of the other. Their worldview is reductive, confined to rigid binaries of good and evil, where complexity is obliterated in favor of simplicity. This is a subject that values emotion over reason, exalts toxic machismo that glorifies violence, and harbors a seething contempt for women, LGBTQ individuals, immigrants, Black people, and anyone who does not conform to their narrow, exclusionary idea of white Christian nationalism. Their identity is an unsettling fusion of economic, religious, and educational fundamentalisms, designed to crush critical thought and enforce conformity. The totalitarian subject thrives in a milieu of manufactured crises and engineered divisions where cruelty becomes the virtue and lust for domination is mistaken for strength. This is not merely a political condition, but a moral disintegration, a retreat from the shared humanity into the sterile, unyielding embrace of authoritarianism. Under the GOP, the creation of the totalitarian subject, shaped by regressive values, stunted agency, and warped sense of morality, intersects with a broader assault on the very meaning of citizenship. So yeah, in summary, it's a lot. It's a lot that we're going to be doing. It's a lot that we need to step forth and do. So what does resistance look like? What do we do here? Well, first, we need to get involved. And this will look different for you depending upon where you are in the country, where you're at in your life, and what kind of passions are driving you right now. But you need to get involved somewhere. Seek out grassroots organizations in your community, those that support things like reproductive rights, environmental protections, racial equity, immigrant justice. These groups might not be political in the traditional sense, but their work is political by necessity. So join them, stand with them. We need each other to stay strong. And I find this a problem. I struggle with this. So don't struggle with this. Don't be like me. Don't let cynicism dull your edge. I've been there, and it's easy to fall into despair. But that's exactly what they want. They want us disillusioned, tired, apathetic. They want us to submit, to throw our hands in the air and say, what's the point? But we know the stakes. Millions of lives are on the line, and we're not here to surrender. So you need to find joy where you can. Hold on to it like a lifeline, because this isn't a sprint. This is a marathon. And let's also be clear about the so-called Christian values that are backing this administration. Trump's agenda of fear and exclusion aren't just unchristian. They're the polar opposite of what Jesus taught. Jesus didn't call his followers to power or dominance. He called us to serve, to protect the vulnerable, to care for the least of these. How his so-called followers can support this agenda in his name is beyond hypocritical. It's dangerous, it's sickening, And if we're serious about honoring Christ's message, resisting these policies isn't just political, it is a moral and spiritual duty. So as you walk this out, it will not be easy. Trouble will find you, but make sure it's the right kind. Get into necessary trouble, the kind that rattles cages and forces change. If you're feeling disheartened or exhausted, that's only because you care. You give a damn about this country, while many can't be bothered. For a third of Americans, even showing up to vote in the last election was even an inconvenience. And maybe we failed them for so long that democracy feels like a burden and not a privilege. But that is not an excuse. It's a challenge. Call them out, wake them up, remind them that democracy isn't a spectator's sport. And above all, remember this: do not submit. Did you hear that? Because I think I need to say this again. Do not submit. Remember that we are on the right side of history here, and losing is not an option. It can't be. And we don't get to sit this one out. The stakes are too high. And the future of our country is on the line. This is our fight, and it is not over. This is only just the beginning. And I know all of this is a lot, especially like front-loading the show like this. I'm fully aware of it. The show today, we are going to be bookending this with a conversation about the power of poetry. Right? Hopefully we can connect this idea to poetic justice. I had sat down a little while back with author Keith Giles and about his new book that he has out that's out right now, Wintermoon and Coffeestains, Poems and Lyrics. So yes, we will get to the place where we can enjoy poetry again in our escape from this hellscape that we find ourselves living in. But you know, I talk a big game about how shitty Christian nationalism is. Well, you know what? I think we need to learn also to poke some fun at it, because it's time again for the choicest cuts in Christian nuts. That's right. It's the Christian crazy.
If loving the Lord is wrong, I don't want to be right.
Lord have mercy. The Lord is my shepherd. He know what I want.
Well, first of the Christian crazy, we've got perennial nutter Lance Wallnau, as Lance is getting a real hard on about the future of nationalism being injected in and out and in and out and in and out and in and out of government, and how wonderful it can feel. Oh, Lance. So when you're listening to this, here's what I want you to listen to: two things. Because part one, if you're listening to at face value, this is absolutely terrifying, and Lance is a damn madman for what he wants, especially with how he has taken his faith in this disgusting way and twisted it into a pursuit of power. Okay, so there's that, and we get that, right? Secondarily, what we're going to listen to is, I want you to listen to his little toadies that are listening to this, and how much abject pleasure they get out of hearing these things. If you don't believe me, let's go ahead and descend into it. And we'll deconstruct this little baby. Let's go.
God's opening a door in the White House for the office of faith and religious freedom, which means Christianity is going to have proximity to the Oval Office to have projects that are going to guarantee global freedom. So what's our call in the nations?
That's so good.
We're going to be exerting an appropriate but not interfering wisdom in influencing governments to stop persecuting Jesus' people. And Trump will create incentives in trade and in business.
Oh, if you're not listening to what's happening here, this is total eroticism from the right. I would like to ask a hand check to his little toady sitting next to him. Put your hands on the table. I need to see where your hands are, because you're doing a lot of moaning as he's saying this. So let's go ahead and redescend into this. and realize that somehow this desire from power from Lance and others of his ilk, I think it's a kink. Don't believe me? Well, let's see.
And Trump will create incentives in trade and in business. Potentially. I'm just speaking creatively right now.
I think you're prophesying, man. I get that's creative.
But it can happen. And here's the fifth column. Why not release the Christians in these nations as an alignment influence with the United States agenda, so that the Christians globally stop being persecuted and can start to line up with an agenda.
Tell me more, Daddy.
Making the world, in other words, going into all the world
in the
and
world,
bringing these ideas out there, so that there's sheep nations start to emerge. When Jesus returns, he's going to gather two types of countries.
Two types of countries.
The sheep are those that did not persecute him by persecuting his people. It's so we can mitigate the coming trauma on many nations by raising up the kingdom influence in those nations.
I'm gonna come.
Excuse me, sorry, my Ebenezer may be raised at this moment, but we need to move on because this is just getting too hot, sweaty, and sticky here on the Christian Crazy. Just like you like it, like Lance likes it. I'm
gonna come.
So next up, we've got Christian nationalist Jason Rapert. Because, you know, when your last name is Raper and you just throw a T on the end, that fixes everything. You know, like how people's names used to mean, like, you know, I'm a blacksmith, I do this. It's my last name tells me this. Throwing a T on the end doesn't make it any less of a Rapert. But, you know, I mean, I'm sorry, I shouldn't do this because I do have a good friend named Johnny Sodomizer. But yeah, let's listen to Mr. Raper and what godly government should look like.
And I'm going to tell you something. The only way this country is going to survive if more Christians get involved, run for office, so that godly people will be in office, passing godly laws, allowing us to do godly things. And the ungodly have had too much free reign in America up to this point.
So we've got the ungodly that have been in government and the godly that are not in government. And the what? Who just elected a convicted felon and a rapist? Anyone? Bueller. This doesn't even make any sense what he's calling for. Really what he's asking for is, I want people who think like me to be able to rule like me in government so I'm never uncomfortable and I always feel good because the people I don't like are persecuted against and the people I like, white, are also not persecuted against. That is the definition of godly white government. Right? White. Yeah, I think that's really where he's, that's what he's trying to clear out of his throat here is that, yes, we need more. We need more men in government doing man things. Because, yeah, what the fuck is this? It's disgusting and it's gross and it's exactly what you would expect out of, you know, Raper. Now, I know many of you may be worried, okay, so this has been male-centric, male-heavy, and in the Christian nationalism world, you know, are dudes the only ones grifting money? Are they the only ones having this happen to them? Are they the ones reaping the riches from their lies? No. Don't worry. We've got your gal. We've got one of your nationalists and gals right here for you. That's right. Prophetess Kat Kerr. And Kat Kerr is really here telling you, as any prophet would, don't you worry. I've got all the right people in my DMs. Praise Jesus.
I'm continually in contact with Trump or with Laura, with Don. They don't care if I mention their name. Let me tell you, they mention me all the time to the rest of the people running. Anybody running that Trump has endorsed, he gives them my name. And I don't mind saying it because let me tell you, I have 50-some thousand texts to prove it.
Oh
I
my
used to have about
goodness.
1,000. I have 57,000 now. And this is the best part. I don't mind giving, God's word to them or praying for them. And they know I pray for them.
Ooh, I just love how relatable Kat Kerr is in this situation. She's just like, I'm just doing the work of Jesus. I've got my 50,000 texts that have come in. You know really what that is? That is the spawn of Satan right there. She's a devil. Burn her. She's a witch. Because she doesn't respond to texts. Like, that's a lot of unresponded to texts. I feel like that is the sign of somebody that is really just a monster. I mean, we often call her moron, but this moron is also a fucking monster. But when we speak of monsters, nothing can be more monstrous than this. And what is this, you may ask yourself? What, Stuart, what is this you're speaking of? You're speaking in riddles. You're speaking in runes. What is happening here? Oh, okay. Yeah. This is really just a setup for the Christian cringe of the week. The worst of the worst of the worst. And this also worst tells you why the fact that Christian nationalists are abject morons. But either way, here's your Christian cringe.
Christian cringe. No, God, please, no.
If you're a Christian, you're going to have to pick. Do you believe NASA or do you believe the Bible? Because here it is in the Bible. God made the sun and the moon and the stars. 3 different words. It differentiated the sun and the moon and the stars on the first page of the book. Okay? Now, what does NASA tell you? The sun is a star, and the stars are the sun. The sun don't twinkle. You ever heard the song Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star? They wrote that back a long time ago. The sun and the stars are different. The sun will never twinkle. It is not a star. It's a great light to rule the day. They're habitual liars. They'll lie again and again. They'll lie to your face. They'll steal your money. And that's what I'm telling you NASA is. It is demonic. The satellites are on balloons, buddy.
The satellites are on balloons, buddy. Come on. Look at the Bible. Look at what NASA tells you. And that just ends up as a, what? What is he talking about? Nobody knows. But, someone knows. And there's folks listening to him. And folks thinking like, this guy's got some good points because I do my own research. Sounds like he does his own research too. Yeah, that's moronic, idiotic, and as low as we can go using our human brains. But that's Christian nationalism for you. But before we get to our interview with Keith Giles, I want to give you something good. Some good for the week. Let's go ahead and listen to Episcopal Bishop Marianne Edgar Budd speaking during an inaugural prayer breakfast sermon where she speaks truth to power directly to Orange Jesus in a beautiful way that really expresses the heartbeat of Christ, and especially in such a time as this.
I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families, some who fear for their lives. And the people who pick our crops and clean our office buildings, who labor in poultry farms and meat packing plants, who wash the dishes after we eat in restaurants and work the night shifts in hospitals, they may not be citizens or have the proper documentation, but the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals. They pay taxes and are good neighbors. They are faithful members of our churches and mosques, synagogues, wadara, and temples. I ask you to have mercy, Mr. President, on those in our communities whose children fear that their parents will be taken away. and that you help those who are fleeing war zones and persecution in their own lands to find compassion and welcome here. Our God teaches us that we are to be merciful to the stranger, for we were all once strangers in this land.
Boom, mic drop, that's it. What a beautiful sentiment, speaking truth to power in the vein of Jesus. Simply doing that, and conservatives lost their minds. But this is what we must be about. And we must remember that we need to step up. We have to keep going. We have to. And forward progress is the only way. And we need to continue to move forward in the ways that Christ called us to love our neighbors, to love those that are marginalized, to love those that are being persecuted right now. Because that's what this new administration is all about. Persecution. And being everything that Jesus is absolutely not. Now, at this point, you may be saying, wow, this show has been fun so far. We've kind of gone from, oh, life sucks, let's make fun of the assholes, to now, what do we do anymore, Stuart? I don't know. What do we need to do anymore, Stuart? And I would also tell you, I'm right there with you. I am right there with you. But what I can tell you is that part of survival in this authoritarian state of how we move forward is this. It's finding moments of honesty, finding moments of ingenuity, finding moments of happiness and joy, and holding on to those and remembering that good times can happen and good things can progress and we can move on. We can move on. And my thing that I would love the most is for us to be able to take this shit sandwich that we've been given and realize that there is more and deliver a poetic justice to this abject hellscape that we live in. Does that sound good? Because I think we should. Let's do some poetic justice and talk about poetry with Keith Giles. Here we go. Well, with me again is Keith Giles. If you don't know him, Keith is a podcaster. He is a best-selling author extraordinaire of the Jesus series, the Sola series, and the Quantum Sayings of Jesus. And today we're going to be talking about Keith's new book of poetry, Wintermoon and Coffeestain. So welcome, Keith. Love having you back on the show.
Stuart, thank you so much. It's always great to talk to you. I always enjoy it.
Well, I want to say, just personally, I really enjoyed reading through this book. It reminded me, and I don't know if you disagree with this one, but it reminded me of like a bit of like Leonard Cohen with some T.S. Eliot mixed in.
Okay, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think that's close.
Because it felt like it was like, I just liked how you just had a lyrical like exploration in many different ways of the divine and then the mundane.
Yeah.
And that dance between light and dark, faith and doubt.
Yeah.
But you did it in a way that felt intimate, but also universal. So I really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And this is such a, I was saying before we hit record, this is the definition of a vanity project because, it helps that I'm the co-owner of Choir Publishing, that I can just decide one day, hey, you know what? It'd be cool if I just gathered all my poems and published them in this book. Like, okay. So I did. And it was it's kind of been a dream. I've been writing these poetry. I say this I think in the back of the book, it says these poems are dated between 1980, when I was like in high school, junior high, I guess, high school, junior high, all the way through college, got married, had kids, all the way. And then some of the poems near the end of the book are poems that I wrote this year. I wrote like in January, February of this year. So it definitely is a wide range of experience of life, as well as some song lyrics that I wrote when I used to be in a band and all that stuff. So yeah, I that is kind of like what I was always going for. The poetry, most of the poetry that I've written, it's either been for my wife to read, for Wendy. I mean, there's a lot of poems in the beginning that are kind of love poems that I wrote just for her. and with her permission, I published these. Right, I had to get her permission to publish these. Or there are things I just wrote for myself, like other than the ones I've written for Wendy, and I wrote a couple for my dad and my mom and some friends of mine, that I wrote and gave it to them. But most of the time, most of these poems, I've just written them for me. This is just what's been going through my head, and I've written them down in, various places. And so, yeah, it's kind of, it is a bit revealing. I think way more intimate, than other books you and I have talked about, that you just mentioned, Jesus On and Sola and the Quantum Sayings of Jesus from Thomas and all that. Yeah, this is much more intimate. It is kind of like revealing a lot about myself and how I think and how I feel and, things I've experienced.
But I think that's what made it very it made it something that I could connect with, because I could kind of, I could understand where you were at within those spaces of vulnerability. Now, how does writing about these vulnerable pieces, how does it impact you personally? Especially when someday that someone may be reading this in a published book.
Yeah. Well, it's very cathartic. You know what I mean? I think that the thing that really was a catalyst for me deciding to go ahead and publish this book was about a year and a half to 2 years ago. I started doing a little exercise where I would get up early every morning, get my first cup of coffee, and go in my office. And I would open a Word document. And I had a document, which I still have on my desktop, called Daily Poetry. And every day, my goal was every day to write a poem. And the only rules were that it just had to be, I had to write something. And it didn't have to be great. And that was actually an important part of it. I gave myself permission that every poem that I wrote every day, it didn't have to be a masterpiece, right? It just had to be, I wrote something. And so that gave me, because the goal was just to get in the daily habit. And it became a bit like therapy, like every morning to get up and come in here. I did that for like a year and a half. Just to come in and write whatever was on my mind, whatever I was feeling in that moment. And a lot of times what happens, at least with me when I'm writing poetry, is, I don't know what I'm going to write before I start writing. It's very stream of consciousness, I might have the beginnings of a thought or a feeling or something I want to express, and I start with that. And then it is kind of like almost channeling something, right? As I'm thinking, as I'm feeling, as I'm following, that first line leads to the next line, leads to the next line. And I'm kind of just putting it out there. But the exercise of being able to do that without wondering or being afraid that, someone's going to read this one day. I was kind of thinking like, well, maybe sometime no one would read this. I remember there's a couple of poems, which I think ironically, at least one of them ended up in this book. The challenge that I gave myself for that particular day was to write something that I was afraid to say, something I was afraid to say. I was reading around that time too. I was reading Rick Rubin's incredible book on creativity, The Creative Act. Fantastic book. And he's really big on giving yourself permission to just create without worrying about an audience, without worrying about, I'm going to create a product that's going to be purchased or evaluated or anything like that. To just create art. And it's, in other words, the only audience is you. So that was again, that was part of why I was doing it that way. But I think as I was reading through his book, I came across a chapter during that time where he said something about how really great art is saying something that people are afraid you're going to say, or saying the thing, that you're most afraid to say, to create something, to express something really true and really deep and really intimate, that you're almost afraid to say out loud. And so that I did that for a couple of days where I just said, okay, I'm just going to do that. Like, what if I could just say anything? And I wasn't afraid of any repercussions, right? It was just a really great exercise. So, and if I can, I want to tell a little bit of a story about one of the poems, because this was really interesting. And I didn't think about this before we started talking, so forgive me. but it's just something really fascinating that happened. So I came in one morning. I was doing that daily exercise, right? Got my coffee, came in my office. Everyone else in the house is asleep. I love that time, early morning, where I'm the only one awake in the house. It's all quiet. Turn on my computer, open the document, and I'm sitting there and I'm trying to sort of like just sit there quiet for a little bit to kind of like, hear what's that first line. What am I going to start writing about today? And the first line came to me. And so I started writing, and I was literally sort of seeing images in my mind as I was writing, right? This sort of stream of consciousness thing. And I wrote the whole thing. And that poem is in the book. And about an hour later, I finished other stuff I was doing. Then I opened social media because I try not to have any social media, open during that time. So I finished all that. I opened up social media and I read the story about how this Air Force officer had burned himself alive in protest of the war in Gaza. And what I realized was the poem I wrote was about him. But I didn't know that it had happened until I'd already written the poem. That was astounding to me. I was like, wow. So I read the news story, and as I read the story, I was horrified, of course.
Yeah.
But the poem I'd written was called "The Bird on Fire," and the first line I think is something like, "This is where we found him." And it was, and the images that I was getting in my head were like about a bird that his wings were burning. And then people were standing in a circle around the body of this bird that had set itself on fire, that it was on fire. And I mean, you know what I mean? It was just such a surreal experience. Like, I had literally written a poem about an event I didn't know had happened until after I wrote it. That was really crazy. So there's some kind of wonderful things. I mean, that was a bad thing that happened, but kind of a wonderful outcome. I think if I'd have tried to do it the other way around, it wouldn't have been as good.
Absolutely.
I would have been too specific. You know what I mean? And I didn't even in the book. So that poem's in the book, but in the book, I wrestled with that. Like, should I put a note that this was to kind of tell that story? But I was like, I didn't want to do any editorializing of it. So most people are going to read that poem and have no idea what it's about. And that's okay too, for people to bring the meaning to the poem what does it mean to you is more important than maybe what I meant it to be. But yeah, I just thought that was such a wild thing that happened. And that's some of the kind of the great things that can happen when you're writing poetry or just art in general.
On that, like that, you just led me to like this idea. So how for you, and I know like this is it's really a journey in poetry over the years with you. How has this act of writing poetry deepened or shaped your faith journey?
That's a great question. I think, my faith journey, it has impacted my faith journey. I think it's impacted probably more so than my faith journey, my empathy journey, which is, I think, very much related to faith. But in fact, it's maybe something that's missing in a lot of faith expressions that I see nowadays. It's funny. I sorry to name drop, but I was talking with David Bentley Hart a few years ago about he loves art and fiction and literature, of course, like that. And he said something about that, like how he thinks that most theologians, and especially most Bible teachers and pastors in America, would do better to put down their theology books and go and read like Melville, or Thoreau or something. Like, you're going to get way more humanity and spirituality and sort of human empathy and connection from reading great literature and poetry than you are from your theology books. And I totally agree with him on that. I think that's so I mean, something else when you were asking the question, what I realized, this is exactly where I'm at right now. When I was younger, so those earlier poems that are in there, when I was in high school and college, I wasn't a theologian at the time. You know what I mean? I was a kid. I loved science fiction. I wanted to be a sci-fi writer, author one day. So I was all about the imagination. I was all about writing and all that. And so that came much easier to me when I was younger, right? In high school and in college. And then in college, I was also in a band, and some of the lyrics I wrote are in here as well. And so I was focused on writing lyrics and trying to come up with creative, poetic ways to express my faith or my doubt. And those are some of the songs and the lyrics I'm the most proud of. But then something happened. So I had that season of my life really roughly through college and around the time I got married. But after that, I walked away from the music side of things. I stopped, wasn't in a band anymore. I wasn't writing lyrics anymore. I got married. I had kids. I had a job, and then later on, I started writing a blog about theology. And then, I've got 7, 8 years and 10 or 11 books of nonfiction theology that I've been focused on for all this time. And now when I go back to the poetry, it's harder. I feel like I have to find my voice again. So for me now, going back into the poetry and the creative part of my brain and expressing myself creatively through writing, just purely expression of creativity through writing, I'm not trying to make a point or, prove I'm right or prove someone's wrong or write some kind of thesis statement. Like, this is just pure creativity. I'm finding it, on the one hand, a lot more challenging to tap into that stuff that, like I said, when I was younger, it came a lot easier. But the good thing is, the more I do it, this is the great thing about doing this daily poetry exercise. It made it easier for me to get there, to kind of reconnect with that creative part of myself, which again, surprisingly, as I said, I realized wow, I think it also is connecting me in a deeper way spiritually, with sort of a divine compassion and empathy for the human condition, people that aren't like me, people that are suffering in ways that I'm not. And so, yeah, I think those are the ways that I feel like poetry has helped me in that way.
So in the same way, and I hope this isn't too much of a similar question with it, but it was making me think, you'd mentioned before, you've done all of this work on theology, you've done all of this writing behind this, but now to be putting poetry out there, what does poetry bring to the conversation about faith that prose does not?
Yeah. Good question. Yeah. Well, I think where I am now, when it comes to the theological stuff, and this does align with your question and things about poetry. I wrote that 7-part book series on Jesus, and that was all about theology and blah, 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 right? When I finished that series, I reached a place where I was kind of like, now what, And that's when I wrote Sola Mysterium and then Sola Deus, and that was much more about embracing sort of the mystery of theology. It's less about having all the answers and realizing that really nobody really has answers, and that's not even the point of spirituality. That's not. It shouldn't be about being right about everything and having all the right theology. It's more about holding loosely and embracing the mystery. So, yeah, I think kind of returning to poetry now that I'm in this place where I recognize that what I would say is true theology is more about mystery, then I kind of feel like poetry is a better way to explore and a better way to express sort of these concepts than prose, at least for me. I think that's the big difference.
Thank you for that. That's fascinating. Being able to juggle and also step into how you wearing different hats, I guess, creatively as you're doing this. Now, one of the things I think that you also touch on in many different ways in the book is this whole difference between the divide between secular and sacred.
Yeah.
And finding this significance, the spiritual significance in everyday moments.
Yes.
How has that evolved for you? Because I know this is an evolving book kind of for you as well, too. So how do you see that's evolved for you?
Yeah, well, it definitely has. It's really funny. These are great questions, Stuart, because I'm realizing all these different layers and ways. I almost want to graph it out somehow. Because Yeah, it's so funny. Because as I was saying, when I was younger, it was so much easier for me to tap into this sort of creative thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, my theology was really rigid, which is so interesting. And it's almost done like it's kind of a thing where it's crossed over now.
Yep.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I just forgot your question.
It's talking about your evolution of being able to see the that there is really no line between the secular and the sacred.
Yes,
grown.
Thank you. The secular sacred divide. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so that was my point. So I definitely was a black and white guy. I definitely, early on when I was younger, it was black and white, right and wrong, good and evil, heaven and hell, and secular and sacred, all of that, man. I was so into that, deep into that. And yeah, it's so funny. Maybe I needed to sort of step away from the creative side to make that shift. And then later, after making the shift, I was able to kind of return to the art again later. That's kind of, if I mapped it out, that's what it feels like. That was what happened. Again, so I did used to think that way, but then when I changed my theology, I started questioning some of my theological assumptions. That began to shift. And I remember that was a really big deal for me, I think probably in the 90s, recognizing, first of all, that God wasn't in that church building, like there was nothing more holy or sacred about that church building than my house or the post office or, school or wherever, or my workplace, that God's presence was everywhere. And that my faith needed to be, like, if my faith wasn't any good, if my faith couldn't survive and thrive in those places, those sort of secular places, right?
Mm-hmm.
My work, the post office, my house, whatever, then what good was it? Or that it wasn't really worth anything. And so I did start to make that shift, or that paradigm shift of realizing, like, there is no sacred and secular,
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually that did begin to align with some theological things I was noticing, like about how that's kind of what happened between Judaism and Jesus and Christianity, early Christianity. Early Judaism, it was all about, you had to go to a sacred place, right? Go to Jerusalem, go to a sacred building, the temple, go to talk to a sacred holy man, the priest, bring a sacred offering, offer that on the altar to a holy God on a holy day, because it has to be the right day, right? The festival day or the feast day or the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's all very divided into these little tiny components. And I realized, like, a lot of Christians do that, right? We still think this way, very compartmentalized in our spirituality. But then I didn't notice this till later on, was that that Jesus kind of blew all that up. That Jesus said things like, the temple is your body, right? Paul says this too, the temple of your body is the temple where, and what is the temple? That's where Christ lives by his Spirit. Okay, wow. And you're a priest. It's not just there's the guy over there who's the priest. Like, we're all priests in God's kingdom. Like, whoa. And we're all daily sacrifices. There's not like, and then it's not one particular day. Like in Acts, it says that they worshiped and they gathered every day and each other's homes, like not just on one particular day. So it went from being a 10th or a 7th to being 100% across the board, everywhere, all the time. And so I began making those shifts in my theological thinking. Yeah, and then I think, I don't know if it was meant to be this way, but it's funny how it just worked out that way. That now that I've made all those theological shifts and I'm returning back to poetry and creativity and art, I'm realizing, like, oh, that was the missing piece I didn't notice before. And it's been really, really great. Sorry, long answer to your question.
No, I love it. I love going on the journey too, because I feel like this book is also part of your journey. And one thing I know you had said you'd do ahead of time, Keith, is give us a taste of Wintermoon and Coffeestain. We're going to talk. I'm going to have you read 2 different poems.
Yes, okay. So you had requested this one.
Yep.
To live is to take sides. Okay. And this is an older poem. I didn't put dates. I originally had dates on these poems, and I decided to take them off because I didn't want people to be like, oh, damn, he wrote that in 1992. So, yeah, but this is a little bit older. I think I wrote this one in, this is after I got married, but I think I was still in college.
Okay.
To live is to take sides. What impresses me most is how he wrote his own story without forming the letters. The way he places his name forever in history without ever holding a pen. The way he lived, the way he loved, the truth that could not be contained within his flesh, the temple of his body, the way he died, arms open, the life he lived to the edge of perfection, his tongue like a double-bladed knife of words that set free the ones held down by imaginary weights, self-made chains, the consequences of searching and never really discovering. What impresses me most is how cruel a man can be, the way the one who is healed can turn and wound another, the way someone who has been offered mercy cannot seem to find a soft word for his own forgiveness, the way a man can sit at the fireside and warm his hands, denying that he has a friend when he knows that his life is full of them. To live is to take for granted.
Thank you, Keith.
Yeah.
And you were going to give us one more too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
So yeah, when I was doing that poem, you know, if you're a Christian, you can catch all the little allusions and stuff. But I tried my best. I was during a phase of my life. I think I was in a band at the time too. So I was trying to avoid all the cheesy, typical, you know, Christianese stuff and just try to make it more relatable. So
you've mentioned being in a band twice. Before you read this, what were you? Are you the bass player?
No.
Keith, what was your role in this?
Okay, so I was in several bands in college, one after the other. But the main band I was in for about 5 years was a band called Arrival. I was the singer, and I wrote the lyrics. I didn't play. I play guitar now, but not very well. But at the time, I didn't play anything. So that was my main job, was singing and writing lyrics. So I was very focused on writing lyrics. Yeah, we were a big deal in El Paso for about 5 years. And the guy I played with in that band, JJ Placencia, went on to become the bass player for Sixpence None the Richer. And
oh wow,
yeah. So shout out to my friend JJ.
Yeah, you basically made him, Keith.
I did. I gave him the bump. That's what it was. No, that is not true. He is a phenomenal musician who can play anything with strings, and one of the best musicians I've ever met in my life. So good. Okay, so here's a poem I wrote called "Please Just Follow the Rules." Hopefully, people will hear the satire, maybe, and dark sarcasm of this. And it's a difficult one to do because I didn't really write it to be read out loud. Yet I have read it out loud now several times and to different audiences. So here we go. Please just follow the rules. And when we murder you, could you please protest peacefully? And when we choke your life away, please kindly refrain from outrage. And when we chase you down in the streets with our shotguns, please don't try to run. Please stop and obey our simple commands. And when we press our knees into your throat for 9 minutes, please don't take a knee during our national anthem and ruin our football games. Things are not so bad, are they? Things are not so bad for us. Everyone has the same opportunity in this land of the free. At least it's always been that way for me. And when we take your life away, it's only because you didn't follow our rules. And when we take your life away, it's just because you matched the description of someone else we feared. And when we take your life from you, it's just because you were holding that cell phone. We thought it was a gun. And that empty hand, we thought it was a gun. And that toy you're holding, we thought it was a gun. And that gun you had a legal permit to own, it made us fear for our lives. You make us fear for our lives. We don't know why. Our lives are precious. Our lives are at risk. You have to understand. It's so hard to be white in America today. You need to understand. Is it so hard to understand? Please, just protest peacefully. Please don't interrupt our football games. Please don't remind us of how we've treated you. Please, just follow the rules.
So wait, where was the satire in that one? I I was agreeing with. No, I'm joking. No, I'm joking.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, the first time I ever read that out loud, I had written it and posted it on my blog on Patheos. And then out of the blue, really, I don't know how, but I got invited to something called Writers Against Racism. I think this was about 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow, that sounds awesome. I just had the email and the description of what it was going to be, and all these writers and poets going to be writing about, writing against racism. And I thought, oh, wow, what an honor. I can't wait. I definitely would love to do that. And so, pick a few things of your things you want to read, some of your poetry. I'm like, great. Okay. So I thought, well, I'll read that poem. And I had another poem I was going to read. And then I get on this call, and it's like me and like 10 other people. I am the only white guy on the entire thing. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to read that poem in a room full of other people that are, like I'm the only white person. Whoo. But thankfully, they were very gracious and very appreciative. And I did a lot of listening in that conversation because I thought, man, I've got a lot to learn here. But that was kind of unnerving.
Mm. Well, Keith, thank you for your time today and being able to share from the book. The book is Wintermoon and Coffeestain. It's available right now on Amazon or anywhere else you're looking for books. It is it's interesting. I felt like it was a good escape from the world, but it also draws me deeper into the world by reading poetry as well. So I appreciated the read. It's a great book. And Keith, thanks for being on the show again. And as always, you're always welcome back, my friend.
Thank you, Stuart. Appreciate it, man.
Much thanks to Keith Giles for being a part of the show today. And hey, I wanted to give another shout out if anyone's curious. If anyone's listening, I am actually on a new podcast that's debuting as well. I am on a podcast with my friend Carl Forehand and JD Forehand, his son as well, where we talk about guy stuff, but not like alpha male guy stuff, like mental health guy stuff and the such around that. The podcast is called The Unlearning Circle. Look for it where you find podcasts. There's also, I believe, a Facebook group on it as well. But that is all I've got today. But before I send you off, just a reminder to share the show, subscribe, and give Snarky Faith a review over on Apple Podcasts. Because guess what? It helps to get the word out to new listeners. And if you want to reach out to me directly, you can hit me up at snarkyfaith.com. Thank you for being a part of the show week after week, month after month, year after year. I appreciate you all. As I release you out into the wild, wide world, I send you out with the holiest amount of grace and peace and snark. I'm out of here. Peace be with you.
This Choircast podcast is brought to you by my book, God, Sex, and Rich People, A Recovering Evangelical Testimony. What happens when an evangelical pastor's daughter moves from Branson, Missouri to the Big Apple? A collapse of identity that begins a journey of figuring out faith, fucking, and the 1%. I wrote this book so I could share with humor and raw honesty the realities of reinventing my spirituality and sexuality in the city that never sleeps and never stops sleeping around. Available now on Amazon.